we highlighted on this program cases of several school districts, specifically in the states of Virginia and Kansas, that were reportedly choosing to abide by woke gender ideology rather than federal law. Well, later in the week, President Trump called out school districts in California, stating that any of those school districts that do not adhere to his administration's policies on transgenderism in schools will lose federal funding. So the question now is, will schools in California comply? Or perhaps they'll be willing to give up federal funding in order to continue to embrace their ideological policies. Policies, by the way, that are harmful to students as well as being unlawful. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Julie Hartman. She's a senior advisor at the Department of Education's Office of Communications and Outreach. Julie, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Washington Watch.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jody.
Well, it's our honor. Let's begin with this, Julie. If you can kind of make clear for us the specific policies, the type of policies at least that President Trump is referring to here. What changes is he wanting to see take place?
Well, President Trump here is referring to really two main federal laws, and that's Title IX and FERPA. Title IX, of course, was passed in 1972, and it protects students on the basis of sex. And what we have seen all across the country, and California has been one of the greatest offenders, is that schools or school districts are allowing students to occupy intimate facilities and participate in sports based on their gender identity. Now, one's gender identity is very different from one's sex. And this is not only unlawful, but it is immoral and totally contrary to common sense. I mean, minor students should not have to go into a bathroom and see members of the opposite sex within those same intimate facilities. Women who have trained and worked hard for so much of their sports careers should not have to lose their titles and their awards because men are competing in female categories. So under the great leadership of President Trump and Secretary McMahon, the Department of Education has taken a firm stance on this. And just to highlight some victories, our Office for Civil Rights secured a resolution agreement with both Wagner College and the University of Pennsylvania. And those schools have agreed to follow Title IX, to separate sports and intimate facilities based on sex, and to apologize to the female athletes and to restore their records that were lost. So that's the first one, Title IX. FERPA, just quickly, is a parental rights law, and it gives parents the right to inspect their child's education records. But what we've seen is that all across the country, there are many schools which have these policies which say that school personnel cannot disclose a child's transgender identity to that child's parents without that child's consent. So again, as I said earlier, this is not only unlawful, it's completely immoral. Parents must be the primary decision makers when it comes to their child's education, and they should know about this sensitive information. So Secretary McMahon and the president have made this a top priority, and you're seeing how vigorously this department is enforcing those two.
Well, we have been following those victories that you referenced a moment ago. And first of all, let me just say congratulations. Those are huge victories. And secondly, let me say a huge heartfelt thank you for standing in the gap and fighting for so many Americans across this whole country. Well done. And I'm glad you were able to highlight those here on the program. If you would, Julie, let's go a little bit further into FERPA. You brought that up. I think this is one of those areas. I think probably the majority of our viewers and listeners are pretty familiar now with Title IX. But as you mentioned, FERPA, that's another big deal where we're seeing a lot of violations. Would you mind just just kind of unfold that a little bit more of what, you mentioned what FERPA is, but just how, a little bit more explanation of what you were talking about.
Absolutely. So again, FERPA gives parents the right to inspect their child's education records. And these are records that are maintained by the school and that are directly related to the child. So of course, parents should be able to see those kinds of things. And Here at the department, we have open investigations into the state of Washington, the state of California, the state of Maine, and then most recently, as you indicated, into Kansas, where there are several school districts which are directing school personnel to not disclose to parents a child's gender identity or so-called gender identity without that child's consent. And this department believes that that is a violation of FERPA. That's a violation of parental rights and their ability under law to inspect their child's education records. If a school is maintaining a spreadsheet with new names and new pronouns, or if they have something called gender plans, which we're seeing a lot of schools across the country have, parents should absolutely have access to those gender plans or to those spreadsheets, because those are records that relate to their child. But what we have seen is that radical gender ideology has taken a precedent here, and many school personnel are choosing to follow that gender ideology instead of protecting these young, impressionable children. I'll tell you quickly, one of the most incredible experiences here at the department was seeing Secretary McMahon host a group of detransitioners. These were individuals who underwent the medical transition in the attempt to become the opposite sex. And then, thank God, they realized that this was a dangerous path to go down. And these individuals sat around with the secretary and said how much they wished that their parents knew what was happening at these schools and that they had an adult in the room to protect them. So Secretary McMahon is that adult, President Trump is that adult, and these rancid policies will not be allowed to continue under this administration.
Julie, thank you so much for expounding on that. I think that's an area that parents need to be aware of, because this is a huge area of attack. And we're not just talking about a president who is trying to push his personal beliefs. We're talking about taxpayer dollars that have been used to push an ideology, and a radical one at that. So this is a critical issue. Again, I want to say thank you, Julie Hartman, Senior Advisor at the Department of Education's Office of Communications and Outreach. We deeply appreciate the great work that you are doing over there, and for taking time out of your schedule to join us today on Washington Watch.
Oh, well, all the credit goes to Secretary McMahon, but thank you very much for having me on. I look forward to next time.
Keep up the good work.